Back in 1984, U.S. authorities were facing a case that shocked the entire nation and would become one of the most complex serial murder investigations in American history. Young women were disappearing without a trace. Then, days or even weeks later, their bodies would be discovered deep in the woods or near remote rivers. Meanwhile, investigators had nothing, no evidence, no witnesses, nothing that could lead them to the killer. As time passed, the investigation hit a dead end, so the police made a decision that no one saw coming. They turned to one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, Ted Bundy. I've covered his story before. At the time, Bundy was sitting on death row, waiting to be executed. But investigators offered him a deal. Help us understand how this killer thinks, and in return, we'll consider reducing your sentence from execution to life in prison. Long interviews followed. The detectives weren't looking for a confession. They wanted something far more valuable. They wanted to get inside the mind of a serial killer who had managed to outsmart law enforcement for years. And shockingly, much of what Bundy described matched the evidence almost perfectly. But one statement changed everything. He told investigators, "A serial killer doesn't always leave the body and walk away forever. Sometimes he comes back." Days later, weeks later, just to make sure, the only witness to his crime is still exactly where he left it. That single idea, as disturbing as it sounded, completely changed the direction of the investigation and became the turning point in a case that would remain unsolved for more than 20 years. But before we dive in, if this video found you by chance and you're new here, this channel is all about the world's strangest true crimes, mysterious cases, and unbelievable real stories. So, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't forget to hit the like button, because today's story is unlike anything you've heard before. It's about a man who spent 20 years living what looked like a perfectly normal life. He had a wife, he had a home, he blended into society, and never once did his wife imagine that the man sleeping beside her every night was one of the most dangerous serial killers America had ever seen. This story is packed with twists, and trust me, the ending is even more unbelievable than the beginning. In the early 1980s, police in Seattle started receiving report after report. Young women were disappearing under mysterious circumstances. No clues, no trail, no sign of what had happened to them. Most of the victims had one thing in common. Some had run away from home. Some worked the streets. Others were struggling through extremely difficult lives. Because of that, their disappearances didn't receive much attention at first. Many people assumed they had simply vanished because of the lives they were living. But then, everything changed. The bodies started appearing. They were found near rivers, hidden deep inside the forests surrounding Seattle. The victims were all young women, left behind in isolated places. In a way so brutal, it sent fear through the entire city. And with every new body, the mystery only grew deeper. Because investigators still had nothing. No witnesses, no reliable suspect descriptions, no clear pattern to explain who the killer was or how he chose his victims. Even worse, the body count kept rising at a terrifying pace. Unlike most serial killers, this one didn't follow a predictable pattern. Every victim was different. Even the method of killing seemed to change again and again, making him almost impossible to track. That's why the American media gave him a name, the Green River Killer, a name that would eventually become one of the most infamous names in the history of American crime. While investigators were desperately chasing every possible lead, there was a man named Gary Ridgway who had been seeing a psychiatrist on a regular basis. These sessions weren't ordinary therapy. They became a place where he unloaded everything buried inside his mind. Before he said a single word, Gary wanted to make sure of something he considered extremely important. He asked the psychiatrist about his qualifications, then made sure he fully understood the laws protecting doctor-patient confidentiality, because he knew that whatever he confessed would stay inside that office, and that the psychiatrist was legally forbidden from revealing anything about a patient, no matter how disturbing it was, except under very limited circumstances. Once he felt reassured, he began telling the story of his life from the very beginning. He talked about his childhood, the home he grew up in, and the deeply troubled relationship he had with his mother. He was terrified of her in a way that seemed almost impossible to explain. Yet, at the very same time, he felt strangely attached to her, an emotional bond as confusing as it was disturbing. His home was never a peaceful place. Arguments, screaming, violence. They were part of his everyday life for so many years. That constant tension started to feel normal. As the years passed, his personality kept changing, until 3 emotions began controlling him every single day: violence, fear, and deeply disturbed sexual urges. Somehow, he was living with all 3 at the same time. The first serious warning sign appeared when he was 16 years old. One day, he followed a young boy into the woods for no clear reason. Once they were alone, he tried to assault him and kill him. But what happened next was incredibly strange. As Gary attempted to carry out the attack, he himself was overwhelmed with terror. He was shaking, screaming, acting as though he was the one in danger, even though he was the attacker. As the boy struggled and cried for help, people nearby heard the screams coming from the woods. They immediately rushed toward the sound. At that moment, Gary realized he was about to be caught, so he abandoned the attack and ran before anyone could reach him. By pure chance, the boy survived what was almost certainly a fatal encounter. But it leaves one disturbing question. If Gary was that terrified, why did he try to attack and kill the boy in the first place? That question would remain unanswered for quite some time, because the real answer wouldn't become clear until we understood who Gary Ridgway really was. The years passed as if nothing had ever happened. He graduated from high school, then enlisted in the United States Army and was deployed to Vietnam. There, he lived surrounded by violence and death every single day. Eventually, killing became something he grew used to. During that time, he also had relationships with several Vietnamese women. Many of them worked as prostitutes. Yet, despite all of that, he continued presenting himself as a quiet, respectful, ordinary man. When his military service ended, he returned to the United States. He got married, found a job at a truck manufacturing plant, and built what looked like a stable, normal life. Everyone who knew him described him the same way: quiet, shy, organized. The kind of man who never caused trouble. But the truth couldn't have been more different. Inside, he was fighting a battle that never stopped. He would often ask his psychiatrist, "Why am I like this? Why do these thoughts keep coming into my head?" The psychiatrist tried to reassure him. He said his condition could improve with time, that what he was experiencing didn't have to define the rest of his life. But despite those conversations, the psychiatrist wrote one final note at the end of Gary's medical file. A note so disturbing it could summarize the entire case. He wrote, "Based on everything I have heard and everything I have observed, I believe I may be sitting across from a serial killer. There is a strong possibility that Gary Ridgway is the Green River Killer." This wasn't based on forensic evidence or physical proof. It was the conclusion of a deep psychological evaluation. The psychiatrist had identified a dangerous combination of warning signs: a childhood filled with violence, constant fear, serious psychological disturbances, an overwhelming need for control and revenge. Along with the unsettling contradiction between the calm, gentle man the world believed they knew and the extreme violence hidden beneath the surface. He also believed that Gary's experience in Vietnam had desensitized him to killing, to the point where taking a life no longer felt extraordinary. It felt normal. He also noticed that Gary's repeated attraction to women involved in prostitution wasn't simply a personal preference. It appeared to be connected to a much deeper psychological struggle that had haunted him for years. Taken together, those warning signs convinced the psychiatrist that he might be treating the very killer. Police had been hunting for years, but there was one problem bigger than anyone realized. Even if the psychiatrist was 100% certain, he had no legal right to tell the police what Gary had confessed. Doctor-patient confidentiality protected everything. Breaking that confidentiality could cost him his medical license and end his career forever. So, he remained silent. Everything he knew stayed locked away inside Gary's confidential file, while the killer continued living freely as victim after victim after victim kept disappearing.